the sky is falling. The sky is falling. CMON is failing. They're gonna go bankrupt. Or not. Did you see the news? CMON's earnings report came out from 2024 and people are freaking out. Are we going all Chicken Little? Is it actually the sky falling, or are they just acorns hitting your head and thinking something else? Let's go. So there's this really interesting report from Boardgamewire that I'll link in the description down below that you can check out for yourself. And the whole issue is that crowdfunding heavyweight CMON, cool mini or not, lost money in 2024. And that is worrying people. That is alarming people. That is causing Reddit to turn into a full-on, everything is awful, they've never done anything good, and, well, you're about to get mythiced, essentially, if you will. However, is that actually the case? Is that really what we're looking at here? Because, again, this is the tricky part. Businesses have this happen all the time. Woo! Good years and bad years, right? But it's what you do with that money in between. It's what happens if you get laid off. Why sometimes that's a huge deal, and sometimes it's just, oh my gosh, I really need to get a new job sooner before we burn through our savings. And this is the issue, right? Because all of this, crowdfunding, the best games of the year, the top 10 whatevers, the hotness all over the place. It's the Johnny, what have you done lately for me, more than any sort of, especially on social media, taking a step back and saying, okay, that in a bubble is not what I like to hear, right? But what does that actually mean larger? What does that mean globally? What does that look like outside of my frickin' small bubble? And that's what Boardgamewire does here, a great job of saying, woo, pump the brakes a little bit. We're a little alarmed, we'll use a little clickbait just like I will, but let's take a bigger look. Because 2017, $3.5 million in profit. 2018, about $2 million in profit. 2019, $1.88 million in profit. So that was, not insignificant right there. But then the last three previous years, 21, 22, and 23, netted about 1.8 million in profit. And now, per the earnings report from this past year, which they had to disclose to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and I'm just going to read it because I want it to be very clear off of my iPad here. It is expected that there will be a loss attributable to equity holders of the company that the year ended in December 2024 compared to the profit of $0.8 million that ended in 2023. The loss attributable will be within the range of $1.4 to $2.1 million. So overarchingly then, we're talking from those other years-ish, $7.3 million, and now we're gonna be losing 1.4 to 2.1. Okay. Now the tricky part with this is you don't see all of the financial books. It's not like we can just flip through the accountings of CMON and say, how much of this money, this profit, where did this actually get allocated? Because a lot of this money will often not just be pocketed, right? In, the stockholders, the company, the directors, the suits that inevitably are probably making more than I want to know, regardless. But then does it get reinvested in some of these actual business dealings, company-related, IP development, whatever else product-wise, to then help, like all businesses, grow further in the future? And that's the conundrum, and that's always the, what do? Do we keep it in hand so that in case a buffer year happens like this, we're a little bit safe, or do we try and reinvest? But if you overextend, then you potentially contract further, right? That's business, economics. I kind of skipped over the part where they lost about $5 million, they said too, in 2020 for COVID. Overarchingly still though, in the last 8 years, you're still talking positive there. And so that would be the one thing I would say of, okay, let's slow down here, because that is still in the black, not in the red, I mean, there are many large companies that operate in the red for years and years and years. The trouble is, there's good red and there's bad red. I'm not going to get into that on this video. That's a little bit outside of my depth, economically, business-wise speaking. And then Boardgamewire, though, talks about they were in an agreement to sell some intellectual property in a $12 million deal. And with 2 new shareholders about to invest $1.4 million for a combined stake of about 16% of the company, they kind of had that fall through because they failed to come to terms. So what does that actually mean? Who freaking knows? The other aspect of this that is kind of all over the place, it's a little bit hard to interpret, right? You know, statistics are easily manipulated. Figures, monetarily, especially, you know, big businesses, Tesla, are easily able to make it look like taxes and income and all of that stuff is, you know, how you want to write it off and those sorts of things. Because they raised $15.9 million in 2024, which again sounds like a freaking metric ton, but comparatively to earlier, that is also significantly down, because they had actually, during the year of that pandemic when they lost $5 million, they still raised $25.1 million during that. Then they bounced back up in 2022 up to $45 million and another $45 million in 2023. But now dropping down to 15.9, that definitely puts a ding in things. And they lost 30% of the revenue of quarter 1 of 2023 compared to quarter 2024, it says. So then going back to what I said earlier, right? Where is that money divested? How much do you have on hand? How much can you produce at a moment's notice? The cash reserves since 2022 have gone down from 3.9 to 1.9 halfway through last year. So in theory, if they still have revenue coming in, and this is between 1.4 and 2.1, they could almost cover this completely with the cash reserves on hand. Now, you don't do that for various reasons. It's why sometimes you don't pay off lump sum in a loan, because if you can invest the money right at a higher interest rate than the loan is interest rate accumulating, then you're better off maybe, you know, making money here than to funnel over here and you're still, you know, getting ahead. But again, in 2024, we only raised $12.1 million, up from the 11.8 during 2023, which again is good. And it just makes you go, what is the reason overarchingly, right? Because all of this to this point is a symptom if you want to take a step back as the hobby. Because what we're really talking about is there's less money being thrown around. And interestingly enough, Boardgamewire brings this up. I don't, because I get yelled at every time I bring it up. They went over and signed an exclusive deal with GameFound. And again, I have to raise the question, when you switch platforms and raise less money, is it causation? Or is it just simple correlation, right? The two are not the same. I do not use the two interchangeably. I'm a big math and science person. So I have to just ask, though, if you're a science person, is the p-value statistically significant less than 0.05? And depending on which side of the pitchforks and torches aisle you're on, you might say yes or no. The interesting quote, and this is actually from CMON's global marketing ambassador, David Waybright from, you may know him, Man vs. Meevil, in case you're not aware, that is his new position as of January as well, working with them. And it is important to find new CMON fans all the time. I mean, right? Like that is, you know, hard stop right there. The main quote. Because if you want your revenue to significantly increase, people like myself, people like you who have backed previous projects, you reach a frickin' saturation point. I love Aeon's End. I am mother effing saturated that game. I haven't backed the last couple crowdfunding campaigns. Not because I don't want more of it, not because I don't like it, but because that's the case. So that is the Zombicide situation. That is the United System situation. That is potentially the Cthulhu. At the same time, it's hard to divest from those properties because those have, up until this point, been your freaking biggest moneymaker by far, in a way. No questions asked, not even close comparison-wise. So when you see things like Mordred, when you see things like A Song of Fire and Ice, or Degenesis Clan Wars, or the Marvel RPG, you didn't even remember that one. That's what they're trying to do. Trying to find another iron that strikes just as hot. And that's the problem, is they haven't found that. And they haven't found that. Again, that's why you're seeing another massive darkness too, with the Dungeons of Shadowreach earlier, which has hit on that a bit more. But therein lies the ultimate question that people are asking. Questioning over on Reddit that was raised subsequently with this, or I should say that actually was just jumped straight to, was going back all to the beginning video, is this a house of cards? And is this going to fall apart as soon as this gets out there? And I wanted to pull this up just for illustrative purposes because it does the job better for me than anything I can show you otherwise. This is, if you're not familiar, their game project update page. All of the games that are currently out there. So skipping Death May Die, Fear of the Unknown, which is completed at the time of me filming this. White Death, Mordred, Deceased, Zombicide, Song of Fire and Ice, blah, 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 blah. You can see all of the rest, right? 11 of these projects total. All of the crowd-funded projects. Very important note there. All of the crowd-funded projects. Now we go over to the pre-order, though. And Metal Gear Solid's done, but you've got another 7 here, are retail, that are not done. And not anywhere close to being done. And that's where that cash reserves, how much I pay Peter to rob Paul, or however that phrase actually goes, is going to happen with these properties, with these products. Can you afford to have 18 different products in various stages of completion? Or are you spreading yourself too thin? Or is it not even going to be a, we can't do this, but it's going to be, we only actually have the resources to be allocated now with this many or this many? Like a Peterson game situation that they talked about, you know, a couple months or a year or two ago, right? They're like, don't worry, look, don't worry. We are going to get them all out to you. It's just we're going to have to do them one at a time. You're going to get this one in 2024. You're going to get this one in 2026. I'm having a hard time doing this with a straight face. This one in 2028. This one in 2030. This one in 2032. I'm sort of joking, but sort of not, because they ran into some more issues. Them and their partner just got dropped, kind of like Affleck did. And so therein lies the question with this, with CMON. What sort of reserve, what sort of rainy day slush fund, when you get laid off, do you have to have in order to have some buffer before you need to go out and get that job while you're still unemployed, right? Sometimes that's immediately, and sometimes you can take a week or 2 or 3 or a month to, you know, because you've got some on hand to be able to float along until you're, well, able to get the other in a row. So am I worried at this point? Again, in a vacuum, I hate to see any of these companies lose money. But going back to that COVID year, they lost $5 million. And that was with a revenue of like $45 million as a whole. So that was like 1/9 or 1/10 in that range, depending on how you want to do the numbers, 5 out of 45, 5 out of 50, you know, percentage wise of what they lost. So you're saying now 2 out of about 12-ish? It's a sixth, right? That's a higher proportion to what came in. At the same time, that is in a vacuum, and you can't necessarily make that apples to apples, oranges to oranges. So again, it goes back to the cash reserves. It goes back into how much is still incoming, which is more of a make it or break it. And the other big unknown, again, like I said, that you went over to GameFound. And I would love to see things like that. Like, what was their incentive to go to GameFound? Because you know that it wasn't just like, you know what, guys, I was kind of thinking about it and I think we're just going to go over to Game. No, I mean, like, they signed an exclusive agreement. Agreement meaning contract. Contract meaning incentive. Incentive meaning money. How much was it? Was it worth it enough? And again, smarter people than I were probably sitting there crunching the numbers going, well, GameFound takes this slight less of a cut than Kickstarter does. We've maybe got less pledge manager fees that we're dealing with or having to pay or anything along those lines. We don't have to do X, Y, and Z logistically, technologically. And so does that account for the potential difference between what we can get on Kickstarter and what we're going to get on GameFound? And so, I mean, you know, if you're doing that smartly, you're going like the Athletic A's back in the 2000s, trying to do Moneyball, if you're familiar with that, where they said, screw the numbers of the, we feel this way, but let's actually go deep analytics, statistics, and see how it pans out. And so I would hope that that was done with this. And if it was, then, okay, you know what? Okay, let's see where it goes. 1 year is not an absolute. 1 year could be a fluke. Because if we look back over these last 8, right, there were like one other year that you were in the negatives and all the other positives. So let's see, you know, what 2025 does. Let's see what all these motherfucking tariffs do. Because the other thing alluded here at the end of the video that they talk about in this is, you know, inflation, the higher cost of living. And this is the other side of thing, going back to the quote of the trying to get new people, because there's saturation of the people that have the disposable income in the first place, like myself, like you, that are now choosing to spend it elsewhere or having to choose to spend it on things that we were not spending it on before because now it's less disposable because tariffs are jacking up prices. Inflation's jacking up prices. And you know what? I just don't need as many of these as the hype and the hotness cycle tells me that I need, because I'm finally getting away from motherfucking FOMO. I mean, at least I hope you are. And that's oftentimes the evolution of gamers in the hobby, is that they're less enticed by that as they go on. And when your main model is driven solely by that, more on the crowdfunding and less on the retail, and you have more of your base graduating out of that business model, if you will, you have to attract new suckers. I mean, new interested parties. And that's probably part of it in that way. Right, wrong, somewhere in between? What do you think? I'm in for 2 games right now, right? So I am not an unbiased person by any means. I'm in for DC United, and I did a little FOMO, I'm sorry, just a tiny bit, for the latest iteration of Cthulhu Death May Die. But I guess the bottom line of it here, at the very, very end, is that if I'm out, well, you know what? Lesson learned. But at the same time, I'm not going to run around screaming like a chicken with my head cut off, saying that the sky is falling. Yet. Peace out. Stay classy. Let me know what you think down below.